Hey, another week. We're very excited this week to have a special guest on here at the Agent Boost podcast. I would say an industry friend for about a year now. We've been excited to kind of bring you out here, so really appreciate it. Thank you, Sam Melamed.
Yeah, we've got the great, one of the goats of the health insurance industry as far as news and information, Sam. So, you know, it's been interesting as Dan and I became aware of you more and more, how your tentacles are spread so far throughout the industry. So we're really excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. I'm excited. This is my first real long-form podcast, and I'm a big insurance nerd, and nothing makes me happier than nerding out over insurance.
I know. I think we could probably do 3 hours on this episode if we wanted to.
Yeah.
It was funny, too, because, you know, obviously we're going to be talking NCD, but, you know, obviously what Mike and I a year ago, you know, when we're constantly doing, you know, content and we're trying to recognize like, hey, who are other smart people in the industry where I actually respect their opinion? They actually tend to seem to know what they're talking about. Their things are relevant. We were like, who's this Sam guy? Like, do you know Sam? I don't know Sam. He didn't work at this insurance company. And then it was kind of like, oh, like insurance forums. And, you know, we started kind of having a better understanding about your background. I'm like, oh, okay. I was like, how does a guy running an NCD dental know so much about MLRs and Medicare and every other part of the industry? So we were impressed with like your background.
Yeah, well, I can take you back to the beginning, and it's funny how things find a way to come around again.
Yeah, you have an interesting origin story. Let's start with that.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, you know, I was born and raised in Denver in a very large family. I have 7 siblings, and I was raised from the time I was a baby to be a rabbi. And actually, I went to preparatory high school at 12 for rabbinics, and then I spent 7 more years in a series of rabbinical schools. And then I dropped out right at the last minute, you know, right at the very end. And so had really cut my teeth from an educational standpoint. Didn't go to college, but just was studying the Talmud most of the time, which is very legalese. It's very intricate, very legislative. And so then I got married young, and I was flailing around. You know, I didn't know what to do with my life and didn't have a college degree and was really struggling. And someone said, let me teach you how to sell insurance. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. They said you could pay your way through grad school. And so I said, great. So I got my license and started selling insurance together with a friend of mine. And I was just the worst. I was just actually terrible. And you know, the thing is, I'm a smart guy. Mm-hmm. I'm good with numbers and with angles, but I had terrible call reluctance. I couldn't prospect. I couldn't close. And frankly, I didn't have much guidance. I didn't have Agent Boost out there at the time where you can listen to 100 hours of content and actually figure out how to do this thing. And so I was sort of lost and really stumbling along. And my wife and I got pregnant, and pretty soon I was just not making a real living, and something had to change. And so back then I started insurance forums. I got really lucky. I really didn't intend for it to become a business. I just really started it to figure out, why am I so bad at this? And like, what am I missing?
Roughly what year was that?
2006.
Okay.
So pre-social media, but when the forums were still the way to learn, right?
Like not MySpace days, but like early Facebook days.
Yeah, Facebook probably only allowed college students back then.
Yeah.
And there was actually an old insurance forum that was overrun with spam, but it had some people on it who were posting content, and I was learning from them, but it was so hard to find the signal from the noise because it didn't have appropriate spam guardrails. And so I just one day started a PHPBB forum. It was free software. I hired someone on Get a Freelancer to put it up, and I got the people who were posting content to port over. And partly because selling insurance was so hard and so painful for me, but this felt like work. It was like I could tell myself I was doing something. I just started working on building insurance forums. And in the early days, it was like looking on Yahoo Answers for questions and then bringing them over, and then looking everywhere I could to find people to start conversation. And then over time, spent time on SEO and really community management, and started to cut my teeth there.
Were you functioning as like the moderator for everything at that time?
Well, there was a great guy named Scott out in San Antonio who was a moderator who spent frankly still spends a lot of time. And there's some great moderators on insurance forums, but yeah, it was very much me. And I really cut my teeth on community management. I'm a much better manager today, and not that I'm a great manager. I have a lot of holes, but a much better manager today because I spent so much time trying to stop fights and trying to solve problems where it's like
getting rid of the junk and the
You don't
spam
say.
in there. And
Arguing on insurance forums. It's as bad as anywhere else, isn't it?
I feel like it's terrible, especially when you have like the brand new person. It's like, what are you guys talking about? This was so easy. I did this, and you're like, that is the most non-compliant thing I've ever heard of. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm a I'm a Shabbat observant Jew, and so from Friday night till Saturday night, I don't go online. And by late Saturday afternoon, I would just get this pit in my stomach of like, I'm going to turn it on, and
walking into
there's going to be this massive fight. And I used to, take it personal. I felt like this is my baby. This is really important to how I'm learning to get better at this business. And at a certain point, I started attracting some advertisers. Brokers Alliance, David Rasich, a very close friend, became my first advertiser, and Craig Ritter was our second ever advertiser. And so suddenly this became something that was important to me, and figuring out how to stop the flame wars and the politics. And, eventually I realized you got to just ride the wave. Like it's going to be what it's going to be.
and some of that boosts it and drives it, unfortunately, too, right? So
I always felt like I would make that trade-off any day. I would, no politics, no flame wars, kindness, and I would do with way less traffic. But it got to the point where I just had to get a job. I wasn't making a living, and insurance forums was fun and it was growing, but it wasn't really supporting my growing family. And so I got a job at a mutual insurance company called the ABC Insurance Trust, which was an association health plan and ancillary plan that was affiliated with a trade association. And there used to be many of these associations that did group benefits for their members back in the day. And then when the small group reform laws started passing and rolling through the country, it just became more challenging. And this trust existed really for a fluke of history, that at one point it was a large stockholder of Hancock when Hancock demutualized. And so they got a large stock grant that gave them money that they used as the basis for the trust. And I was there for 15 years. And took on progressive responsibility, and eventually took over as the CEO of that company. And so I was running insurance forums, and it was growing over time to be a little bit of a publishing business. Back then there were a lot of insurance magazines, and there were insurance websites like Life Health Pro or Producers Web and Life Insurance Selling. And story for another day, but there was a big private equity roll-up of all the insurance publishers. That became Summit Business News, and then Summit Business Media, and then Summit Professional Networks, and they ended up selling in a fire sale to ALM, who still owns some of those assets. But it was assembled at just the wrong time when the internet was really eating publishing.
Yep.
And so I was working for this insurance entity. It was a mutual company with a subsidiary agency. And I was running insurance forums. And then about 7, maybe 8 years ago, I joined a business group called YPO that really changed my life in many material respects, but most importantly, just put me around more ambitious people who were pushing me to do a little bit more.
Is it like an entrepreneur group or like a mastermind? What is YPO?
It stands for Young Presidents Organization, and so you have to be running a business of a certain size and be under a certain age. And so it's not only entrepreneurs, it's also hired guns, which I was, really a hired gun. It's people, multi-generational. Like EO would be an analog, but you have to have started the business. Right. YPO, you don't. But it's a actually exceptional organization. Really, really changed my life in many material respects, and get a lot of value. And there's a very nice insurance network within it. Some of my close friends in the industry are also YPOers. But that really pushed me to say, I'm working for this mutual insurance company, which is a great job that I loved and worked with amazing people. And I got to report to a board of trustees that were made up of company owners, construction company owners who would govern the trust. And so for 15 years, I got to work with them and just see how business owners really thought. And eventually I started looking for my next opportunity, and NCD at the time was National Care Dental. It was growing very fast, but had some operational challenges, and just became clear I should really be running this business, very much in that association space, and very nerdy insurance, sort of a sleepy ancillary supplemental health plan.
Yep.
And so just under 4 years ago, I took over as CEO and been on the journey every day to try and get good at it. Exciting, terrifying, thrilling, all the ings. And it's been a joy. And maybe a year ago, maybe even a drop less than a year ago, I started to write on LinkedIn every day. Mm-hmm. And that just, it's unlocked incredible opportunities. I've been very surprised by the reception. And there's a few things I've found that have been really amazing as a gift for me. But mostly this was my team pushing me to say, every time new regulations drop, you send us notes about all the places you're finding interesting things. And it really was that Talmudic training, where for many years I was somewhat resentful that I had spent so many years studying something that I wasn't really leaning on professionally. And then here I am, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually the perfect training for this moment in time to really read regulations and understand the complexities between the states and the federal government. And so my team really pushed me to get out there. I don't like to be very public, and this is
front and center.
My first long form podcast, and it's probably taken 9 months since you first asked me.
Hey, we were pleasantly persistent, weren't we?
You were, and that's important. Yep. But my team and Sean Fenlon, who's a close friend of mine, and Adam Young, both they just really pushed me to say, hey, you have a talent for this. You have something to say. Get out there and write. And it's just been a revelation.
So the whole time that you had insurance forums, you weren't doing it at the level you are now. You weren't like leading the conversation. It just happened to have you had this outlet then, and it ended up becoming LinkedIn, where you really started focusing on the posts.
And I would add though, but I think that it matters because your posts. I mean, I would imagine it takes you sometimes a few hours of collective thought and actually articulating that though, because usually, your posts on LinkedIn are pretty poignant. I mean, and I can always tell that they're very well written and well articulated, your thoughts, and not everybody can do that. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. When I first started, we run EOS in our business, the entrepreneurial operating system. And one day my team, we were having our quarterly meeting, and my team pushed me that you should set a goal to make 75 LinkedIn posts this quarter. And I was scared shitless. I'm like, 75 posts, that's a lot.
Yep.
But building the discipline every day, what I found is I 10x'd my rate of learning, because when you feel compelled to say something and you want to actually have something interesting to say, then you got to go that layer deeper. And so I do consume a lot of information. I have ADHD, and I love moving from thing to thing to thing.
Same. Yeah, we're very similar.
We're all these self-proclaimed insurance nerds, all the same. And everything that you're saying, I can relate to, because I hate being in the spotlight. In fact, I bet you I've listened to maybe 20 minutes of all of our podcast episodes total, because I hate seeing myself. I hate hearing myself. For whatever reason, I don't like it. For a lot of years, I did not want to do it. It was actually Mike and a few other people who were pushing us, saying like, hey, and then I also realized that out in our industry or in the ecosystem, there was a lot of bad content, like meaning that there were people out there taking over airwaves and forums and space that really didn't have that much experience or know what they were talking about. And I thought, well, it's really doing quite a disservice to the industry at large. And so I thought, well, okay, let's step in and start doing this and creating the content. And to your point, I mean, I subscribe to like Optum's white papers. I'm reading white papers all the time. I'm going on Fierce Healthcare and Becker's and, and
CMS Newsroom, just reading the actual press releases.
Yeah, everywhere out there. And it's so to your point, it's like, my weekends and leisure is like, ooh, there's this new article that dropped, and you spend an hour and a half reading it. It's just interesting. So I can very much relate to everything that you're saying.
Yeah, the thing it really did for me was force me to go that one layer deeper. So I'll scan 300 headlines a day, and I'll read 50 of the articles, but how deeply am I really reading it? Am I really getting to comprehend? If it's something that doesn't directly relate today to my business, how we're going to grow, how we're going to be more effective, it's very hard to go that one layer deeper and say, no, I'm going to force myself to really think about what this thing is. And so being forced to have something interesting to say really pushed me to go that layer deeper. And then it's a recursive loop, because over time you start seeing more patterns and you start recognizing things better. And so it's been a great gift. It's certainly been helpful for NCD.
We were talking off camera before we started, and there's a definite need for what you're doing and what we've even feel we're doing with the podcast, which is a lot of people aren't giving voice or talking about some of the things going on in the industry. And it almost seems like, when I describe it to other people, there are silos in our industry, right? You have government and bureaucracy siloed off, not talking really to the carriers or the brokers very often. Then you've got the carriers and the insurers who are kind of siloed off, and then you've got brokers and distribution out there. And there has not been a very good forum. There's never been a table where everyone's sitting around discussing these things in a collaborative way. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so many issues in the industry right now, is that there isn't that collaboration ultimately with the beneficiary's best interest in mind.
Or that they think that they're collaborating, but maybe with the wrong parties or not getting the correct opinions.
Yeah, you guys made an interesting point last week that the agent community doesn't have the gajillions of dollars or the concentration to really have as strong of a voice. And that is absolutely true. We saw this when the ACA was passing, that the carriers, because there's a lot more concentration of value, concentration of dollars. Sorry, I hope those will come out in post.
Of course they will.
No, it's natural. You can have a sip.
That they were able to shape the ACA a lot more than the agent broker community. And because of that, for a number of years, you really couldn't get paid or couldn't make a living selling, even though the agents could have, had they been banded together better, articulated more of a vision of what it would take to actually enroll people at scale. And, there's trade-offs to a lot of the private equity consolidation in the industry. There's certainly ups and downs. You have this contention between healthcare that is heartfelt versus spreadsheet healthcare. But one of the benefits of consolidation is you do get some more of that concentration. And the reality in Washington is that if you want to have a seat at the table, you're going to need to have some of that concentration. And so I do think that the agent community is moving more aggressively in that direction. I've been very pleased with some of NABIP's recent activities and some of the strength.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
That I've been surprised. It's very hard for associations to take a strident view. You're always going to piss someone off, and they're very consensus-driven organizations. But I think they got the message that if we don't start policing our own and start speaking up and really advocating for the beneficiary at the center, then it's going to impact a lot of people's ability to make a living. And it's not going to help the beneficiaries either. We all know that the agents spend tens, hundreds, thousands of hours a year, really as community health workers, helping their clients, and often people who aren't their clients actually access care, actually reduce the cost or increase their ability to get care. And losing that would be a great disservice to the consumers. But if the agents don't get together and have a louder voice, then they certainly risk that.
Yeah, we basically were talking about the agents have kind of become the punching bag or the villains for a lot of the issues over the industry over the past 3 or 4 years. And we don't necessarily feel like that's deserved. We talked before, there are some bad actors and fraudulent people in the industry. And one of the things Dan and I say all the time is, show me your comp plan, I'll show you the behavior, and so there's a lot of times where that's the root of some of these issues, and bad actors will always flow to where there's perceived opportunity, right? And how do they maximize that, and how do they scale that?
Well, and then some of it, there's only regulatory measures to one layer, right? Where it's, hey, we have regulation to this one layer, and then everything beyond that is just their responsibility. And so I think that is what's created a lot of those poor behaviors, like we're talking about. Some other formed payment arrangements that are within guidelines that have really exacerbated some of the problems too. And I would also add too, I think we've been talking to Jessica too at NABIB, to their CEO, and to add to your point, I've been really pleased to kind of feel a noticeable difference in the direction of that organization over the last year or two, to where I was sitting there saying for years, like, why am I wasting all these dollars to this organization? Like, what are we, who's your audience, and what are you actually trying to fight for and protect? Because there's a bazillion consumer entities out there for senior citizens. Like, that's not what this is. We're contributing dollars and wanting this voice and this protection, and to have that seat at the table. And I think they've recognized that and pivoted too, which has been good.
Yeah, the reality in our world today is that whether it's social media or whether it's political polarization, salacious things really sell and drive the conversation, and nuance really does get lost. And that's one of the things I'm most hopeful about the new administration, is that many of the people they are bringing in really do have strong business backgrounds, understand the role of the dynamic marketplace, and understand that, like, frankly, capitalism run amok with no guardrails is problematic, but having too heavy of a hand and too much onerous regulation also stifles creativity and makes it more challenging. And so I am hopeful that they will be able to appreciate that nuance, that there are some great brokers and there are some terrible brokers, and figuring out how to layer in enforcement in a way that not only goes after the bad actors, but really prevents them, because it's just less attractive of a place for them to spend their time, is going to be a win for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem.
Agreed. And I actually think that there was this sentiment, right? I at least think that there was this preconceived notion or this bad idea out there by a lot of these agents, brokers, and entities saying like, oh, you know what? I can't say the T word on here because YouTube will censor us, and stuff like that. But there was a shift in administration and, this new regime coming in, and they thought, oh, well, great. Now we just get a pass on everything. Now we don't have to worry about all these regulations and we can just do whatever. And they've been a little bit caught off guard, I think, recently by them making comments and saying, no, like we may need less brokers and broker oversight and regulation. Like, that's something that's here to stay. And so I think regardless of the administration, I think that's been a surprise to some a little bit.
Yeah, and it really shouldn't have been a surprise, because the current administration was pretty clear about who the healthcare thought leaders were, what were some of the institutes and think tanks that were doing some of the foundational work to prepare for new regulations. But anyone who was surprised should just take some time to read through the new ACA regulations that dropped.
Yep.
These came out pretty quickly after the election, and they're very clear about where they see brokers as being a part of the problem, or some of the wrong incentives in the market enabling brokers. And so they are both thoughtful and asking directly for a lot of feedback, and they're pretty strident to say that this is part of the problem and they are going to work on cleaning that up.
Yep. What are some of the already announced changes that we know so far that are on your radar that you're looking at that have kind of piqued your interest a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it was March 10th or March 12th, the Peter Nelson and his group dropped the first proposed regulations for the ACA. And you can see a real vibe shift from the previous administration's regulations that really were not just designed, but pretty overt to say we want to grow the ACA.
Quantity. Yep.
Quantity. We want to grow. And many ACA watchers, or people like you in the industry who saw what was happening in 2023 and especially in 2024, were trying to raise their hands and flag it. But there was the reality that strong enforcement was in conflict with the goal to grow this in a dramatic way. And so I think they did the best they could, and I think Jeff Grant is a great guy, and he really worked very hard with his team over there. He recently retired and is a consultant now. And their hearts were in the right place. They wanted to drive enforcement, but there was the reality of the administration's policy goals to also grow the ACA. The vibes of the new regulations, before you look at any of the specificity of what they're suggesting they're going to change, is very much around program stability, which also came as a surprise. Some people said, oh, the new administration is just going to attack the ACA and want to
Repeal and
bury
replace,
it.
yeah.
And that's really not the case. But they are talking about we have to make this stable and in line with DOGE and in line with some of the administration's stated priorities of making the government more effective and more efficient. They want to be eyes wide open about the reality of the fraud that is in the market. And so they analyze the data in some creative and interesting ways. And, administrations will look for different things to support their broader policy goals in the data. And what they found in the data really did show that there was a fair amount of fraud. And the fraud really drove the federal government to have very significant cost increases. And so the vibes check is very different to see like what they're looking at. From a specificity standpoint, one of the biggest changes is going after the fact that many people who did receive full subsidies probably did not qualify. And they call that out in the data that in a number of states, and they especially call out Florida, the total number of enrollees who claimed to be within certain corridors of the federal poverty level, excuse me, and therefore qualifying for zero cost plans,
Right.
exceeded the total number of those people that actually lived in the state.
Right. And how confident are we in our very effective government that the people who, received those full subsidies actually had that bump up, so to speak, with the IRS with filing their taxes to recognize and say, oh, you actually received the subsidy, you didn't qualify, therefore here's your tax bill. My confidence level is next to zero. I don't know about yours, but...
Yeah, and if you read some of the lawsuits, there's some specific harms where you can see people's actual, surprise tax bill that they were not expecting. So going after that, they're going after it in a few interesting ways. Number one is just on the auto enrollment side to say, all right, we should not let people just automatically sweep into a plan the next year and assume that they requalify. There's open discussion, and they're actually asking for feedback, and the comment period is still open, I believe.
Do you think that's useful?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I was a little bit, in a joking manner, because I would just say I feel like with like the CMS call letters and other things, you're like, comment period's open. You're like, you're going to really listen to my feedback.
And it was like, commenter says this, but we decided not to listen to that and do this anyway.
Here's the middle finger.
But maybe it's, vibe shift different.
From many decades, not many, 2 decades of watching policy in D.C., what I can say is, number one, absolutely, your voice does matter. You can bring up a point in comments that they did not consider or they did not understand the marketplace dynamic and how it plays out. It is certainly true that every administration is going to have its general policy philosophy or policy goals and is going to be more likely to cite the facts and figures and comments that actually support it. At the same time, when there is an overwhelming response that makes a point that they may not think is central, they take that into account. And this is especially true around trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And they talk a lot about trade-offs in the regulations. If you really weed through it, they say there was a good reason to do this. And we're not discounting that reason, but we look at this cost and we say this cost is too high relative to that reason, and therefore we're going to make a new decision. And so it's been my experience that generally they do listen, and I have found the people I've engaged with in this new administration really are eager to understand the dynamics and recognize that some of the regulations that are well-meaning do not play out in the field the way they were intended. And so really understanding that is important.
Okay. Really interesting.
Yeah, you'd mentioned some of the notes, talking about agent empowerment and some of the ways that you suggest people can get involved in making comments. What are some of the other things that you feel like agents and brokers and FMOs can do to kind of make their voices heard collectively?
You know, one of the things I like to do anytime there's a new regulation that drops is to look at who they cite, right? Where are they getting their information? Because the regulators can't be everywhere all the time, and so they rely on think tanks and on organizations that have the time and the budget to do some of that foundational work. And so when you think about who's really driving the debate, often the policymakers and the people in the government, they are listening to other people. And frankly, I hear from people in the government frequently that they read what I write on LinkedIn and that they read other people. And I do think actually there's a much quicker pipeline of information over to CMS today than there ever has been. But if you look at the think tanks, there's people at those think tanks that love to engage with people in the industry. You know, Paragon Institute is one that comes to mind as being relied on for a lot and shows up many times in the new regulations. And so engaging thoughtfully with people there. You know, the Commonwealth Fund was one that was cited a lot in the last administration, and I know there's some people looking to engage with them now. So it's not just being reactive and saying, oh no, these new regs came out and they don't understand my business and they don't understand how this is going to play out and impact me, but it's saying, how do we tell the story more effectively of the positive that we're doing? How do we highlight that, you know, more often? You know, in my business, we pride ourselves on being the highest rated insurance plan in the country. But you know what? If you don't tell people that, they probably won't know. And
Right.
so you gotta talk about it. And until the last 6 months or so, it was rare to hear agents say, you know, I'm going to start spreading that I just spent 4 hours on the phone with someone, showing them their 11 prescriptions, which ones to use GoodRx and which pharmacies to go for and which ones to put through their formulary. And
You're supposed to all go through the formulary.
You're gonna you know, those carriers are gonna slap your wrist, that bad broker, and ruin their star rating. You know.
Yeah.
Doing a good work though.
Doing the good work, or sitting on a 3-way call with someone while
Yep.
they're setting an appointment with a doctor that's hard to get into.
Right.
You know, we have a lot of customers over the age of 90.
Wow.
You know, they care about their teeth, they care about their health, but the kind of customer support that an agent or a carrier has to provide to support people in that kind of group is very different. So I think agents really telling the story, and I would encourage NABIP and some of the other agent organizations out there to gather more of these stories. I know they've been doing that, and to have a PR campaign and actually showcase and share some of them.
Yep.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
And I do think there ultimately needs to be more dollars flowing into that organization. I mean, if you really look at, like, let's say the real estate industry and the board of realtors and how large that lobbying organization is, that doesn't really exist to this magnitude in our space. And there's a need for it, candidly.
Yeah, and Dan and I are becoming more open to the idea of our role in there. And, you know, this podcast and some of the things we do is part of what we do. But I think we realized that, you know, for a long time, we didn't want to fly too close to the sun a little bit. You know, you want to kind of stay off the radar. You know, You don't necessarily want to be the ones that see it. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That CMS is looking at, nor do you want to be the ones that are spending. We're trying to grow our business, right? We don't want to spend so much time in like the administration and, you know, advocacy type stuff, but it is becoming increasingly important to the growth and the survival of our industry.
Yeah, you know, there's a great story of Golda Meir, who was the prime minister of Israel, and someone asked her, you know, she was this short, soft-spoken female, not always soft-spoken, but they said, how did you become such a leader? And she said, what, me, leader? I was in the elevator, and no one was pushing the button, so I pushed the button.
Yeah.
And that, I think it is important to recognize that you do have an important role, because so much of your content gets watched by people in the industry that it does shape and influence. And when you have a wide audience, you can really be effective at directing behavior. And agents most are conscientious and hardworking and want to just keep their head down and make a good living and feed their family, take good care of their customers. But the reality is, if you don't pay attention, then things can change.
Yep. And I don't know where you wanted to shift to with the conversation, but before I forget, I mean, I know what you're going to say, but I want to convey the point. So you're running NCD right now, and that's like your operating business. That's your focus. That's where you actually are making your money. Why are you spending all your time learning about regulation, ACA, Medicare, and everything else?
Partly because it's fun. I really have fallen in love with it, and it feels like the hunt or the chase. You know, my wife always wanted to go whale watching. She loves nature, and I was not really into it, and I was resistant for...
you were an inside kid, right?
Exactly. I grew up in an indoorsy, bookish family, and finally she convinced me we should go. And we were in Vancouver once, and we went whale watching. And within 10 minutes, I got drawn into the thrill of the chase. It's like we're looking for them, and the gamification, and it just got exciting. And one of the truisms that I find in business and in life is that if you look for things to fall in love with, then it will pull out the best of you. And the difference between the best of you and just the okayest of you is huge. And so we think about that at work all the time, right? How do we align the right person with the right role, with the right feedback mechanisms to pull out the best of them? Because really, if you want to produce alpha in business, you can either hire better people or you can pull out better from the people that you work with. Mm-hmm. And so I've just really fallen in love with the thrill of the chase of looking for insights and trying to understand how the regulations interact with each other, how they interact with the marketplace dynamics. And I'm a nerd. I admit it, and I wear it proudly, and I really like to think about capitalism and how it plays out, and especially with the zeitgeist right now around healthcare being so negative, and obviously the tragic killing of Brian Thompson rattled a lot of cages. Maybe even more so than the killing was the response and the glee that some people. Yeah. And so,
how much of that you think was real and authentic, or do you feel like I almost feel like a lot of it was fake or manufactured? Do you think it was there generally that much vitriol like out there? Do you think there's some, agitators, some online agitators and provocateurs? Because it just was so shocking that there could be that many people.
I see both sides. I have no doubt that there are foreign adversaries who look every time to foment dissent in the United States, and it is part of their strategy, and I have no doubt that some of that is happening. At the same time, some of it's real. What we've seen play out on college campuses or elsewhere, maybe protests are funded by bad actors, but they tap into something that's real.
But I also think too that's that general sentiment too. Like we always joke about the South Park episode too, and the episode of how difficult it was for him to just access care and the prior auths and
navigating the American healthcare system.
Yeah, and just being kicked around and finger pointing everywhere else where they can't get care. I think almost everybody at some point or another, whether it's you or a family member who has actually had a severe health incident, has experienced that pain.
That's exactly right. And they say democracy is the least worst form of government, or it may not be perfect, but it's better than all the others.
It's the lesser evil,
Well, and I think the American healthcare system has a lot that's broken about it. I've been overseas, and there are some places that do have a better functioning healthcare system, but a lot of them, Canada and England, have some real challenges and real troubles. And I don't think there's any silver bullet or magic wand that can really fix ours. But I do think that the glee that some people were showing in the wake of the tragic killing of Brian Thompson was tapping into something real, that people are frustrated. Our country does spend more than any developed country on healthcare, and we are not getting what we deserve in terms of the outcome. And I don't think anyone's to blame. I think it, like an organism, evolves over time, and it just becomes what it becomes. But
the blob has become the blob.
Well, what was he talking about, Mehmet Oz, in the confirmation hearing? He was like, high cost for bad care. I can't remember the exact quote, but
as a heart surgeon, I can attest that the most expensive care we give is bad care.
to that point that we spend more on healthcare than any of the top 50 nations in the world, and we have worse outcomes most of the time.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this as it relates to automation. When AI tools first came out, I got really excited. My tech team was showing me some of what's capable. I'm like, this is amazing. Let's think about doing all this. And then we had an interesting conversation internally that said, if we have customers who call in and they have an easy problem to fix, and we say, oh, our engineering team can automate this and just fix it, and they won't even talk to a human.
The chatbot or the AI system.
So I like saving costs as much as anybody, but it actually pulled away a human interaction where somebody was going to be able to feel the care that we have for our members, and actually a problem we could solve really easily for them and leave them with a good taste in their mouth, so that if they actually run into some friction or a really challenging issue, they're going to be much more likely to give us grace and say, I think I'm going to get taken care of here because they have that cadence. And so I think the tension between spreadsheet capitalism and healthcare, and maybe healthcare with a heart, the healthy tension and the back and forth is what produces the best outcome. And when it swings too far to one side, it can be a problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it, since you're a nerd as well, it's been interesting for me to take something and run it through the Grok, AI, and then put it through Gemini, and then put it through ChatGPT, and then kind of see the same question, same structured in the same way, and then look at like the nuanced answers back from AI. I don't know if you've done that exercise. I do that pretty frequently with like 3 different ones, and then you kind of go, okay, form a little bit better opinion, based on like
that's how I get the news. I look at 3 different news sources, and then I go a left, a right, and a center,
somewhere
and then I go.
between.
Yeah, for sure. For research, I was just I made a post recently about potentially shifting ACA enrollment timing to not be so strongly overlapped from Medicare open enrollment, because the new regulations do cut down on the ACA regulation the ACA open enrollment timeline, and that
which I'm in favor of, by the way.
Yeah, and so I was using each of the different AI tools to say, all right, what are some arguments for each of the stakeholders, for the durability and the financial success of the program, for the consumers, for the agents, for the regulators, and each one spit out some different interesting thoughts.
Right, but it helps you form a good opinion too, and then look at the source and the links and the resources too.
I don't know. One of the things I've been using, I'm sure you do the same thing, is I just have like a flow set up where I ask AI, like, tell me all the healthcare related news from the ACA and the Medicare industry this last week. And occasionally I find stuff that I'd missed myself, through all my different sources.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never tried that.
Well, I always think back of, and I've told Mike before, one of the things that we try to do in the episodes each week is I think about going to school as a kid, like in like middle school and like homeroom, and you had like, here's your world in a minute. I don't know if you remember that segment.
Channel 1. Yeah,
it was Channel 1 with Lisa, what was her name? Lou or something, and Cooper Anderson, and here's your world in a minute, and so I kind of think like, we try to accomplish some of that same thing where maybe it's not a minute, but, in whatever time we take, we at least give people some of the quick hits of what we think are big things happening that week, So,
and that's what you do with your daily posts.
Yep.
Yeah, always trying to find something interesting to say, and spice in some personal stories of life or leadership or what we're up to in our company. And like, I'm also a big dental insurance nerd. Dental insurance is the biggest part of our business.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was segmenting to. Yeah,
I recognize that dental insurance is not that interesting to most of the people I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. Just like, for an FMO, dental insurance is important, but it's not the main thing. It's going to get a certain slice of your attention. And so, so I try and spice in a little bit of that or thoughts around the ancillary development, but not too much.
So, yeah, and before we run out of time, that's what I really wanted to spend more talking about, NCD, the product, the experience, the why, everything from the approach to distribution, how you actually get distribution, get it in the hands of brokers and agencies, how the consumer ends up with it, why it's a better product or experience, and how you've been able to kind of, delineate yourselves as a company and a product from, a crowded space?
Yeah, it's very much a journey, and we're still learning, and we're trying and testing new things. NCD is really a program manager. We manage benefits for an association called the National Wellness and Fitness Association that allows members to enroll in coverage. And MetLife is our carrier for dental insurance, and VSP is our carrier for vision. And we think about building interesting products, right? Big data nerd. How do we study every filing from every carrier and look at, like, California, for example, has dental loss ratio data reported for individual, small group, large group across a number of years. How do you really weed into the data, generate consumer sentiment, and try and build interesting products that create value for the consumers over time? And for dental especially, it used to be, the reason dental insurance exists is frankly because of the tax deduction that you get from work, right? So the reason the ecosystem developed was because an employer could pay premiums on behalf of their employee, and you could pay your portion of premiums through Section 125. And so therefore you're paying with pre-tax dollars. And that just makes it a much more effective way for someone to generate value. Over time, the network started to develop, and that became a big component as well, because if you have a strong network with strong network discounts, then actually the out-of-pocket costs are a lot lower. Over the years, as dental care has gotten more expensive, it started to become a real insurable risk, right? Where you could have a $10,000 dental bill, and that is a surprise bill that someone is really not able to cover. And so we partnered with MetLife to put together the first $10,000 annual max plan in the dental market to really play that role of insuring that risk and to build a plan.
Doesn't have a 3-year waiting period?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have any waiting period except in New York and Connecticut where one is required. But it has escalated major services. And actually by year 3, it's 190/60. So it pays 90% of basic and 60% of major services. And so we really tried to design products that this will be the last dental plan you ever need to buy. Obviously, in the ACA marketplace, you have a lot more people who come in to be a sole proprietor or work in the gig economy, and then they'll go back and work somewhere. And so you have a little bit more of that movement. But in the pre-retiree and the retiree world, you really have a lot of that durability where we want to build a product that you're going to love, that you're going to use, that's going to create benefits for you across a long period of time. And then, we think about business as what are the races we should run. I like winning races.
Yeah.
We like
We all do.
we like winning. We're not going to be the best at everything. And there's a lot of great dental companies out there, a lot of companies I admire and have a lot of friends at a number of them that I learn from, that we watch, and that we observe. And really in the dental space in particular, the addressable market is so much larger than the current market that's being served that, yes, we also want to win market share, but mostly we want to grow the market because the single biggest barrier to to dental insurance, like we don't lose customers to competitors. We lose customers to fear of the dentist. To I bought this thinking I haven't been to the dentist in 3 years and I really got to go. And then I got nervous. They're going to make fun of me for not brushing my teeth, or they're going to yell at me, or it's going to be painful, or I don't have a dentist I can trust. Yeah, it's actually the single biggest barrier we find to
Interesting.
And so growing the market and really finding ways to help people access more care is important. And, there's some issues playing out in the market where the dentists are generally not contentious, but they don't always see eye to eye with the dental insurers. And actually the ADA and the NADP did come up with compromise language through the National Council of Insurance legislators for some of the MLR regulations that are moving in the dental industry. But really, like, we love dentists. We think they provide a really important service, and we want more people to go to the dentist. And because people learn that you access dental care through dental insurance, because generally they get it at work, getting more people to have dental insurance actually drives better oral health for the country. So we think about what are the races we should run that we could be the best in the world. One of those is member care. We do have the best member care team, I believe, in the history of the insurance industry. And when we started out really saying, let's make huge investments here, people in the industry told me, Sam, you're making a mistake. There's no ROI. People expect a shitty experience when they call their insurance company, and the fact that you're going to answer the phone quicker, it's not going to show up as an ROI.
And onshore, yeah.
And onshore, yeah. And to be honest, they weren't wrong. Like, yes, we have, I think, better retention than the market, but because of the dynamics where, like, if you're under 65 and then you get a job that has dental insurance, you're going to drop it. You know, there's a limit to what retention is going to be. But where it shows up is in some of those softer areas of who can you hire, right? Who wants to come to work every day and say, I feel proud of the company I work with. I feel good about how we treat our customers. And then to what we were speaking about earlier, to pull out from people the best in them, right? To have people say, I want to solve this problem. I want to do good here. And, you know, that feeling ultimately across time really produces a lot of value. But we also see that our customers are much more willing to give us grace. You know, if you Google NCD Dallas, you can see our almost 6,000 five-star Google reviews. If you look at our Glassdoor reviews or our shopper-approved reviews, everyone is legitimate and it's earned and strategic, right? We're also thoughtful about how we collect reviews and what is the way to ask and how much friction there is.
Right.
I think we might be the only insurance company on the planet with a 4.9-star rating on Better Business Bureau, where people mostly gripe and complain.
Yeah.
Again, it's every single review is earned, but it's also being thoughtful to say, you know, it's so much friction to leave a BBB review. You better have really, really gone above and beyond for this person before you ask them to do it.
Absolutely.
And
I have a question. You guys are mostly remote, correct? Or how is your...
yeah, our team is fully remote today. We're spread across the country. You know, I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and NCD was started in Dallas. And when I first took over as CEO, we had a large office there with Nexus. But I said, I'm not moving. I love my life, and I have 4 kids, and my wife. We're very happy where we live. And if I'm not expecting myself to move, I'm not going to expect others to. And there's trade-offs for sure. You know, I come here to your beautiful office, and I see the kind of relationships you can build with the people you work with, and I feel admiration for that approach, and in some ways I wish we had that as a reality. On the other hand,
You don't have the lease that we do.
That's true. But also the kinds of a talent that we can recruit. We want the best people in the world to work with us, and that's not just really, really smart people, but people who are aligned with our mission and our values, and who want to be relentlessly positive and want to get shit done. And, you know, those are the things that are really important to us. And we find that they're all over the country. So our leadership team is actually here in Salt Lake City because of you guys.
Thank you.
I try not to travel any more than I have to because I have a family at home and I don't want to be on the road so much. And so I like to align our leadership team every quarter we get together in person with, you know, some other value of going to visit my parents or seeing someplace interesting, or in this case, coming to do the podcast and get a tour and get to meet you guys in person after I learned so much from you.
And speaking of travel, I think you will be traveling again in a few weeks, whether you want to or not. It sounds like you'll be at Medicarians, so you will be there.
I will be at Medicarians. Yeah, I'm very excited. So Jay and I are partners in Medicarians, and I've been involved really since right when I took over as CEO of NCD. I came to the old National Medicare Supplement Conference and saw
St. Louis. Yeah.
that one was in Schaumburg, Illinois. And I said, all of our customers are here, all of our prospects are here. This should be bigger. But also, there was so much conversation already happening around Medicare Advantage, but it wasn't really captured in the brand. And Jay's done just a spectacular job. And there'll probably be 42, 43, 4,500 people at Medicarians this year. And I'm excited to have a fireside chat with Ben Pajak, the CEO of Health Plan One, and Chris Giuliani, the CEO of Spring Venture Group. It's going to be a great event. It's really a great opportunity for people to engage in the industry with thought leadership, meet a lot of people at once, also to engage with the regulators.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So between insurance forums, your LinkedIn community, your involvement with Medicarians, you definitely have your, like I mentioned, your tentacles throughout the influence in the insurance industry. I have a couple follow-up questions, but have you, with the way that the benefits have kind of degraded with the MLRs and things like that over the past year, have you seen has that been a big benefit for you on the NCD side of things in dental, or is that just now starting to play out?
Yeah, we for sure saw major tailwinds this past open enrollment, because after 5 years or so of really an arms race of increasing value in the dental benefits embedded in Medicare Advantage, we suddenly saw a very stark pullback. And we're still doing some research around exactly how stark the pullback was and where. But what we're hearing from carriers as they're thinking about their bids next year is that with elevated MLR, they are going to continue that pullback.
Yep.
The flip side, you also had the administration really pushing to say, we don't love that plans are using these supplemental benefits so much for marketing, but we don't actually have data to say whether the members are getting benefit commensurate with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so this year, they have new regulations requiring them to actually report utilization.
Yep.
A couple of years ago, there was a GAO report that made some guesses, but they said we really don't actually know the answer here. And then there's also new law that took effect this year that requires plans to notify members mid-year when they have unused supplemental benefits.
Similar to Part D, which we've been saying for.
And the other thing is that benefits activation is a big conversation in the industry to really help members get deeper integrated into their benefits. And so a lot of brokers have actually been spending time over the last year or so saying to their members, hey, let me help you set your first dental appointment. You have a no cost, no copay coverage here. And so those are driving up utilization also. And so it's hard to imagine there's not going to be some continued pullback. Dental is still very effective at marketing Medicare Advantage, and it is one of the most commonly asked about features when all else is equal. Mm-hmm. All else is rarely equal in terms of formularies or in terms of benefits or structure or network.
Right.
But when it is, it's for sure one of the most commonly requested benefits.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on that, what Mike was saying, because I was going to ask the same. We've noticed that pullback. We are already predicting that it's going to be another rough fall this year. I think we're in for more turbulence on the Medicare Advantage side. And then, we talked off camera a little bit too about how hard it's been to be profitable in the ACA side with just all the fraud, right? Which has just been rampant and continual and just evolving in different ways. And the fraud stops in one way and then the fraud picks up in another way. And part of the only way that you've been able to actually make a profit has been, based on selling ancillaries. And so we've kind of been banging that drum, so to speak, as a sales organization of saying, whether you're in the ACA space, this is one of those things that's going to bolster your profits or make you profitable or fund your marketing budget. And if you're on the Medicare side, it's how many of your consumers that really, truly care about dental are going to want a dental that's not subject to filings next year with their Medicare Advantage plan and may or may not be there.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to it, right? The first thing is just load balancing your time, right? If they shorten open enrollment for ACA, which they just proposed, and they remove the monthly SEP, which they proposed, then if you really want to be a healthcare specialist and your focus is ACA, what are you doing the rest of the year? Right? Who are you talking to? What are you presenting? How are you partnering with your clients and your prospects to actually keep building your brand, your business, and helping them? So that load balancing and the timing by itself is its own tailwind. certainly if there's further pullback in the embedded benefits in the Medicare market, that's also going to drive just more actual need for these benefits. The ACA is actually interesting. The last administration passed a law that said that ACA plans are allowed to include adult dental as an essential health benefit for the first time in 2027.
Yep.
And it's unclear whether the new administration is going to continue with that or not. But states I know are studying. It's very complicated because how does it apply with deductibles and with coinsurance and with other structures? But if they are able to include it, then that could be somewhat of a headwind for the ACA markets. Of course, that doesn't take place for another while, a few more years, and it's unclear how it's going to play out. It's probably more focused on the fully subsidized market, right. Whereas the unsubsidized market, where they're really paying those extra premiums, in many cases they'll be much better off with a standalone dental plan.
Well, and also is that in step with the kind of tone and temperament of Doge and the new administration, and where the dollars are going to come from to fund that too, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of lobbyists swirling around DC to push and protect interests, and I don't have any insight into how that will play out for sure, but they'll certainly be calculating what the cost of that new mandate will be and whether that is within the spirit of the Affordable Care Act or not, as they think about essential health benefits. And so the load balancing is a piece of it, the profitability of just what does it take to actually acquire customers, especially with some scale, if you want to build this expertise and serve customers and grow a business. What are the ways that you can serve those customers better? And ancillary benefits is one of them. And, we're hard at work on a full suite of other ancillary benefits as well. We're working on some interesting cancer and heart stroke and critical illness and hospital indemnity. And we think a lot about product development. Yeah. Jameson Keller, who runs our product development shop. And, on the one hand, there's always this allure of building a sexy product, something that doesn't exist. And I have this dream and this vision to build a cancer plan that doesn't just pay you some money when you get cancer, but actually prevents cancer and detects cancer early and educates you about it. And then if you get cancer, it helps you get the care that you need. And on the other hand, the history of insurtech is littered with the corpses of companies who really thought if you just build something better, it's going to sell itself. And actually it doesn't. You have to understand the market dynamics, who actually sells this, how they sell it, do people want it, are they going to buy it, is the process easy and simple. So we are hard at work on a full suite, and we're just getting warmed up. We did our first acquisition last August when we acquired Tenure, which was a VC-backed startup. And Brett Voith, who is the CEO, is now our chief strategy officer, to really say, how do we think differently about product innovation and product development in an industry that is regulated at both federal and state levels and has, a lot of complications.
That's interesting. So before we wrap, I'd kind of like to, what are some opportunities that you see out there in the swirling marketplace and some of the potential changes? Most of our demographic is agents and brokers and FMOs. What are some potential opportunities that you see out there? And what are two things that maybe a thing or two that you see as a threat or something that you're really keeping your eye on to see how this pans out?
Yeah, I think chaos and challenge always creates opportunity. You guys talk about it a lot. There's winners and losers, and it's up to each of us to be the winner, right? How do we figure out how to create value? When I think about creating sustainable, durable business value over time, that is solving real problems that people have and continuing to solve them over time. And I had a fascinating ICRA conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago where he said, I'm in the employee benefits industry, and the thing I'm concerned about ICRA is that most of the value is created on the front end when you convert them. That's the year you have to work really hard. But once it's done, then to make the money I'm making on the plans is sort of rent seeking. And that's where I think is the biggest opportunity, is to think about value creation mechanisms. When you solve real problems for people, when you develop real expertise around healthcare navigation, however complex the Medicare market was a year ago, this year it's way more complex. You got Part D smoothing that, I don't know, you guys know more about that than I do, how it's playing out in the market, but you got changing formularies. And so to me, educating yourself, becoming a nerd, becoming a student of the game is the single biggest opportunity any agent or broker has to really grow their income and help create a durable, sustainable business over time.
I love it. That advice is one of the things that we try to hammer into the heads of all our agents or all those that listen right now is your earning potential and your value is commensurate to your knowledge and your expertise and the problems that you're able to solve. And so I thank you for saying that and echoing that, because we feel like we're saying that all the time.
In a very eloquent way, because yes, we just observe that, we talk about those agent types and the people who are like, have been around for a very long time and gone through cycles of the industry. And then you have kind of a different type of broker who worked at a call center, got hired on, worked for a year or two or a season or two, and then exits and, comes into the space. And you have these newly kind of agents that have only been selling in a couple of years, and they have this different vision of what they're trying to do that is just not sustainable,
Yeah, and we talked earlier at the agent training. The other thing is to just never give up, to stick with it. When I was a struggling agent, I had no choice. I couldn't give up. I had a family to feed, and so I stuck with it, and I'm so grateful that I did. But any agent out there who's just getting started or who says, this is really complicated, this is really, really hard, if you learn 1% a day, you get 1% better, and you just don't give up and you stick with it, it's incredible what can happen in this industry. There is no industry, to my knowledge, in the country that does not have an education barrier. You don't need a college degree. You don't need a GED to actually succeed in this industry. You need to want to serve people. You need to figure out what are the rules, what are the regulations, how do I create value for my customers, and the sky's the limit. And there's no other industry where you can make a great, honest living and really feel great about what you're doing. And I hear a lot of insurance agents who are embarrassed to say, I sell insurance for a living. And I think it's the exact opposite. We need to have pride and say we are helping people, we are solving problems, and we're excited to do it every day.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we say all the time, helping people with their health and wealth, right? What's better? And just to kind of bring it all home, we were talking earlier about Dr. Oz and some of the talking heads in the industry saying there needs to be less brokers, right? And there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse. And you go, if you look at the next couple of years, who are the brokers that are going to remain? Is it going to be the brokers who have just been, their value is they're an enroller? They're not very well trained. They only know how to look at a computer screen and take an inbound call and offer surface level help and present an
AI will replace them.
Or is it going to be one of these agents who knows all these nuanced, sophisticated things, pays attention to individuals like yourself or listening to the podcast? And those are the brokers that are going to survive. Those are the ones that are going to be able to collect and aggregate the value and consolidate the opportunity in the industry.
That's exactly right. There's plenty of opportunity, and if the broker community shrinks, there's still plenty of opportunity.
Yep.
Focus on creating value, helping people, and solving problems, and you're good to go.
Yep.
Love it.
Well, I would say we're probably at time or past. I mean, like I said, I could talk for 3 hours. Maybe we'll hit you up for a follow-up, maybe at Medicarians for a quick 20-minute hitter, something like that.
I'm sure there'll be some news between now and then.
Yeah, there's news every week. So anyways, maybe we'll hit you up for a follow-up episode because we'd love to have you back again. So
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great.
And if you don't follow Sam on LinkedIn, if you don't sell NCD, you probably should follow him and make sure you have a contract, whether that's through us or somebody else.
Yep, hit us up. We'd love to be your partner, get you with the solid ancillary product that you can offer to your members via NCD. We'll post a link on the episode if you'd like to get contracted. We'd love to earn your business. And same thing, you should follow Sam on LinkedIn too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming out. Appreciate you.
Thank you much.